right. Hey, everyone who's out there in the internet land. Welcome to the Express News Editorial Board live stream. It's our first election night live stream that we've done in our new building. And I think it's maybe the first one we've done ever, right? I don't know if we've ever done a election night live stream. And we have a very special guest tonight. We have outgoing Bexar County Judge Nelson Wolff. So, Nelson, thank you for being here. We're also, just briefly, introductions, Carrie Clack, editorial writer and columnist, and associate editorial page editor Nancy Prayer Johnson. So, Judge, thanks for joining us tonight.
Yeah.
It's a big night for you.
Yeah.
It's a big night for the nation. So let's just start with, this is probably the first time in how long since you haven't been on the ballot?
Yeah, 22 years.
Right, 22 years.
Yeah.
So it's kind of the official end of or the
right.
beginning of the end of a incredible era here in Bexar County. So I just want to hear your thoughts just briefly on the end of this tenure as county judge and how you're feeling tonight and.
Well, I feel good. I must say it's the most relaxed election I've had in a while. And I'm excited about the new county judge coming in. At this point, it looks like it'll be Judge Sakai. Of course,
definitely going to be Judge Sakai, I think.
So. And so he's well qualified and been a good friend for over 22 years. And my wife, Tracy, worked with him on the children's court the minute that I became county judge. So we've had a great relationship with him, and he'll do a great job.
Yeah. When you think of, at this point, last time I looked at the results, it was there. Judge Sakai was very far ahead. I don't know if it's been updated since, but it was
right, 58, 59.
To 39% or something.
Yeah.
So, when you think of Judge Sakai presumably taking the reins, what is he inheriting at the county? What challenges do you think he's going to face, and what is he going to need to tackle?
Well, first of all, I hope he keeps the management structure. We've tried to keep politics out of management. We were able to appoint a county manager and have a streamlined system, and created a lot of new departments over the last 22 years that are very effective. And by keeping politics out of the management, I think we run a very efficient one. We've got a AAA bond rating with all three agencies. We've left more cash on hand than we've ever had before. We've cut tax rates over the 22 years. So we got a good, efficient system. I just hope they don't politicize it. That would be my best advice. Go with the professionals in management. Don't try to politicize it.
We wrote of you that you're the most influential political figure of the modern era in Bexar County politics. I think we all agree on that. And part of your tenure has been just big visionary projects, and so when Peter ran his campaign, it was back to basics. Mm-hmm. And I'm just curious, you endorsed Peter, but what do you think about that?
Well, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. There will be some decisions that they will have to make on some bigger projects. Baseball will be staring them right in the face, and that's not an easy one. So there will be some that will evolve. Whether they take the lead or not, some of them will have to be decided. We'll have to wait and see what those are. None of us could have seen what COVID was going to come and what we'd have to go through there. But I think there's nothing wrong with concentrating on the fundamentals of government. And then if he sees some things that he believes in very much that ought to be done on a bigger scale, well, then it'll be up to him to decide to take that on.
Yeah, you've obviously you've expressed an openness on the baseball stadium.
Yeah.
Full disclosure here, I'm a big believer in. I would love to see a downtown baseball stadium, and I get all the concerns about taxpayer funds, but to me, there's a dynamism there that I think is really exciting. So, what are your? You want to expand on your thoughts on where that goes and where it should go?
Let's just start 30 years ago. The stadium was a little younger than I am, but it's pretty damn old. So they have to do something about it. And what we've seen in those 30 years since we built it, that downtown is now a viable spot. It wasn't that way 10 years ago, 15 years ago. I give Mayor Castro a lot of credit for that because he put in place the housing program and put up bucks to make it happen. So we got a thriving central city now with more condominiums going up, more hotels going up. So it would make sense to have something in the central city, whether you lived on the west side, east side, or north side. You have a central place to come if you want to go to the ball game. We all know that there's elements in it that are also good for the developer, but I think there's some good for the community too.
Yeah. I'll keep going.
No,
I guess.
I'm
Yeah.
just looking at the results.
Yeah.
What would
Yeah,
your
yeah.
advice be to, let's say, to whichever judge is
Yeah.
is elected? What would your advice be on the baseball stadium?
Well, obviously, I'm too much of a baseball nut. I'm obviously for it, and I would advise them to be for it. But
But the
that being
specifics,
said, though, it has to be the right structure. It has to be a fairness between what the county and it had to be a partnership with the city, I think,
Okay.
and a partnership with the private sector, one that people would have confidence in. There's a possibility that UTSA could maybe play their ball games there like they're playing in the Dome.
Okay.
So it has to be a partnership that the voters will decide they think that's a fair partnership. And they would have to decide that in all likelihood, and some farmer vote on a hotel, motel, car rental tax. We tanked during the COVID, but now we're coming back real strong. So I'd say within a couple of years, they would have that option if they so chose to do that.
One more baseball question, and I want to
Yeah.
ask you some politics questions. But
Yeah.
do you think a baseball stadium has to be built with Major League Baseball expansion in mind? I mean, obviously you've gone through it with all the leagues.
You
but
know, it would be really good if you could. The footprint from stadiums are not that big. Like if you go over to the Astros game, the footprint's only about maybe 8-10 acres. The rest is parking if you want
Right.
it. But if you're in a downtown area, you don't need that parking like that. So the footprint's not that big. Footprint of a minor league stadium, probably 6-7 acres at minimum. So if you had a little extra land and you had some capacity of sizing up, it'd be far off in the future yet, I think. But it would be cool if you had enough land to be able to size up to a larger park.
Right. Politics. Do you looking at the early results at least, and they
Yeah.
seem pretty convincing at this point.
Yes.
In terms of Democratic turnout in Bexar County.
Yes.
So, do you think at this point that a Republican could win countywide in Bexar County? I
No.
mean,
No, not the way it is. The Republican Party and some pieces of it are moved further and further to the right, and I don't think Bexar County represents that. I think we're more of a, moderate, caring community than what some of the far right people think. So I think it all changed basically in 2018. It used to be in the gubernatorial year, Republicans would win, Democrats would lose. Well, that changed in 2018, and now we're seeing almost a replication of 2018. So it would be hard for them to make a comeback. They'd have to moderate some of their positions. I believe very much in women's right to choice. I believe very much in the fact that we got to get control of guns. It's crazy to be letting people run around with assault weapons when they're 18 years old, killing people like they killed them in Uvalde. It's a crime. I think a lot of people feel the same damn way I do, and nothing's being done about it.
yeah. And yet, statewide,
No,
Statewide, Republicans win, I think.
right?
It looks that way. All the polling and all of the indications are that they'll win.
Yeah. And do you see any? I mean, how do you capture the tension there that here in Bexar County, it's so difficult for a Republican to win countywide, and yet in Texas, we're, for decades now, we're talking about how difficult it's been for Democrats to win statewide. And,
Well,
how do those two work together?
You have the urban areas, which are basically Democrat, and as you see, they don't like us. They do everything they can to destroy local government, but they've got the vast rest of the state, and we're outvoted when it comes around to the rest of the state. It's almost like if you go into a knife fight, a Republican's taking a knife and a Democrat's carrying a little teddy bear with them, a little afraid to get in the fight. And I think that's been some of our problems.
How does the dynamic change, or does it change? You sound kind of pessimistic.
The only way that I know it can change is that you've got to get a Democratic candidate, particularly at the gubernatorial area, which somehow can relate to the rural areas of the state. We don't have anybody that's been able to do that. Beto came real close in 2018. He created a lot of excitement out there. And but the numbers, if they come up to be true, he won't do as good as he did in 2018. So there's got to be some way to relate to the rural areas. And you can't just talk about all the issues that most of us Democrats talk about and expect to win a statewide race in Texas.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say the same dynamic that when you were talking about why the county won't go Republican because they're moving to the right. Well, that's statewide.
That's state
so do you see anything that would change the Republican Party statewide in Texas to make room for a more moderate brand?
Well, most of the moderate Republicans have been shoved to the side. I just cringe to think that somebody like Joe Strauss would be run out of office and Lyle Larson would be demagogued against and be censored, and I just don't understand it. You can understand why they're against me because I sure as hell don't believe the way they do, but I can't understand why they would run off a Republican like that.
Yeah, what I don't understand though is why Democrats are so disliked in rural areas.
Well, my personal opinion.
Yeah, that's why you're here.
They don't talk enough about the working man. Talk about minorities. We talk about gays. We talk about lesbians. We talk about what I just talked about, abortion and guns. But they don't talk enough on the statewide about the working stiff. That's where Trump got people. The working stiff, the guy that works his butt off for all day long, and maybe not the greatest educated guy in the world, but he works hard. He doesn't understand why he's not being treated as good as the others. That's the problem.
Yeah.
Who was the last Democrat who would have fit that?
Hightower.
Hightower.
Clinton. Well, on a national level, Clinton, I think did. He knew how to relate to people. He came out of a state that was relatively, I guess you would say, conservative, more rural. Came out of Arkansas. He knew how to talk to the common man. He knew how to do that. And he knew how to motivate him. He knew how to get him going, and really make it work. As far as I know, he's the last one I can think of that knew how to talk to the common guy on the ground that's working his butt off every day.
What about statewide? Josh mentioned Hightower, but
Hightower, you mean the Agriculture Commission?
Yeah, Jim Hightower.
He was something else. Yeah, he was something else.
That's all I can think of,
And, to get a statewide candidate, I think, and of course a national one, you have to kind of build your way up to it. And I don't see anybody here in the state of Texas from a statewide sense that's really come on strong and that can, make a big difference.
Well, what about our next guest, Joaquin Castro?
Well, I love Joaquin. I'd love to see him. I think he's done a great job in Congress, and he's tough. He doesn't bring the teddy bear. And I think he could be a very strong candidate.
Do you ever feel at odds with your own party? That you're very much a centrist Dem. You're an old school Dem, and
I'm not as far left as some of the others are, particularly nationally. Well, I got in politics, when I ran when I was 29, and I must tell you that my views haven't changed very damn much since then.
Yeah, unbelievable. It's, it still feels surreal to think that you're going to be out of politics. I'm having a hard time wrapping my mind around that.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I'm gonna stay involved. I'm talking to a couple of universities and, maybe doing some lecturing and working with their students and trying to galvanize some more interest in them. For instance, 18 to 30, I think we're voting 11%. 50 and older, I think it's 70%.
Yeah.
Young people, they just haven't quite got with it yet. And so I want to try to have some. I don't care which way they vote. It's up to them, but to at least get involved and start doing things more.
How concerned are you about the national mood and the national environment, everything that's going on in the nation?
Well, like I say, I've been around the game now for 50 years. And if I were to say historically that what we're seeing can go back to 1917, 1922, when there was a real nasty push by the right and actually deporting people because they were immigrants. And then you can go to the McCarthy area where they ruined numerous lives by making unfounded claims, and he would lie over and over, and the more he lied, the more he was believed. And now we see that again, assisted by the internet, and even worse, conspiracy theories. If you believe in reasonable conversation, you've surrendered. There's very little bipartisanship. There's a certain nastiness out there, and still a bunch of people think the elections were illegal and they were cheated, and when every fact in the world, shows that the elections were properly done when Biden won. Good Republicans that stand up and tell the truth, they're demonized and defeated. It's just madness as far as I'm concerned, in my view, what's going on out there. I've had a couple personal attacks against me.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that, about those exchanges,
But, I could listen to the lady that said all those things.
At HEB?
That said I won't be walking the streets and all the stuff she said. You can almost just take that and listen to stuff over the internet. She just mouthed the same thing she heard over the internet. And it's just, it's really bizarre to believe that these things are happening now. Trump changed the dynamics of how people act and how they govern and what they say, and it's very distressing. There was a quote made by, I think it was Supreme Court Oliver Wendell Holmes, back in the era when there was a lot of people being thrown in jail for their beliefs and for what they said. That truth, I may have this a little wrong, that truth has to compete in the commercial area, has to compete. In other words, if you can't make truth work, you're gonna lose.
Right.
And to a large extent, we're losing right now.
Yeah, I mean, it makes me think of social media, right? Everything that's happening with Twitter and
Yeah.
I mean, it seems though it's more entrenched.
I think you're right.
And tonight, we don't know what's going to happen yet. Whether this is going to be a red wave or whatever, but that's going to dig it in even deeper. How do we get out of this?
I don't know how we got. Well, I know how we got to it. Trump, in one answer, has changed the dynamics of everything. I think, from the conspiracy theories to the. I mean, how do you attack the Capitol and people die, and you say that's okay?
you say they were tourists.
Yeah, they were tourists. How can you say that? How can you say the elections were not done right when every lawsuit that was filed was proven wrong, and when you have 3,300 or so counties running election, we all got together and we planted this? Yeah, sure we did. I mean, it's just bizarre, absolutely bizarre.
But why Trump? Why was it? I mean, you could see like a Ronald Reagan.
Yeah.
Obviously, I mean, it makes.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess you miss Ronald Reagan.
Yeah.
But of all the people who a party would sell their soul for, why this guy?
Well, I think I think the main thing that he did that everybody else has failed at, he related on some of the issues that he stood for and spoke up for the common working guy. He got people in the coal mines and union people and all of them voting for him, you know. I don't think they voted for him because he's not telling the truth, which he wasn't, or all the other stuff he does, but I think he related to that guy. And he's got a following that people are so loyal it doesn't matter. He even said himself, I can go out and kill somebody and my supporters will not leave me. Well, he's right.
Yeah.
And look at the Attorney General for Texas.
Yeah.
In some ways, doesn't more so than even Abbott or Patrick getting if it happens they get reelected.
Yeah.
Doesn't it say more about the state that someone like Ken Paxton?
Say more about the state.
About the state that someone like Ken Paxton would be reelected.
Yeah.
Someone who's been indicted.
Like I say, there was bipartisanship. You can talk about Reagan, you can talk about both Bushes, and there was bipartisanship. That's gone away. Mm-hmm. Now the thinking is, I'm for my guy, right or wrong. He can be the biggest crook in the world, I don't care.
Yeah, but I do think
he's my guy.
I mean, I agree in some instances, but look at the Collier-Paxton race. Look how many Republicans endorsed Mike Collier. I mean, that was prominent. Maybe they're in the minority.
Let's see how the vote goes, though.
I agree.
But here's how the Republicans are so much smarter than we are. When they saw that, one of the Republican strategists said, "It's the post-Labor Day parade of dinosaurs." I thought, now that's a pretty good quote.
Right.
That's probably what it's going to be. I may be wrong. I hope I'm wrong.
No. I mean, you're right, but I mean, it's still at least they spoke up, right?
Yeah, I'm glad they did. I wish there were more of them that did.
Is you have a favorite candidate this election cycle, like a candidate you just really liked a lot, or you're super impressed with, and
you mean that
regardless of the outcome, but when you look, just
on a statewide
or local or whatever, is there someone that you were like?
Well, I think Jay Clayburgh was a great candidate for the land commissioner at every credential you could possibly want, and he'll probably get swept away with the rest of them. I thought he was a really good candidate. Democrat, I thought that this young man, Blanchard, that was running in the Republican primary, business guy, family,
Lyle seat,
everything, and he gets trounced. He didn't make the runoff. I've seen some really good people, not win and or not say not win. We'll wait and see on some of them, but there just hasn't been the right candidate, I don't think, on a statewide level for governor.
Well, Joaquin Castro is in the room now. So.
Well, maybe you can energize him. See if you can get him to announce tonight, and that would give you a scoop.
For those who are watching.
He's not going to come to the race with a teddy bear.
No, he wouldn't. One more local question for anyone who's watching. Joaquin is here, so we'll shift guests pretty soon. But when you look at the commissioner's court, that's likely to be would be Judge Peter Sakai as the county judge.
Yeah.
I assume, I haven't last looked at the results, but I assume Grant Moody will be.
It looks that way.
And then you've got Rebecca. And you've got Tommy, and am I flaking out on?
No, you got them.
I got them all, right?
You got them all.
Okay.
You got them all.
So when you look at that court, there'll be a lot less experience, obviously.
Yeah.
So what's your assessment of the court?
Well,
I think. And Justin, sorry, Justin.
I think Justin Rodriguez probably has the best grasp of everything. He's a lawyer. He's been around school board, legislative, city council here. He's by far the best, in terms of really understanding everything. So I think hopefully he will end up being a leader on the court also. I don't know Grant Moody. My son's visited with him a couple of times. Great credentials. There's nothing wrong with being conservative. I think that's great as long as you're not crazy. And I think that he will probably be a good court member too, from all indications. So I think we'll have a good court, and I think Judge Sakai, if he is the guy, would do a good job.
You know, one other county race, Joe Gonzalez, Mark LaHood. It looks like that race. When I last checked, it looked like that race was over.
Yeah, I think 57% were for Joe. I think in that race. I thought that one might be was a little bit closer than Sakai's race, but not much, about the same. And I'm just really proud that people in Bexar County, at least, are trying to be reasonable in what they're doing.
Yeah.
Looks like the race has been called for Abbott.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
What'd you say?
The race has been called for Abbott. I know Fox has done it, and a couple other folks places also are calling it.
Yeah, I was talking to a pretty high-ranking Republican a little earlier today, and he says, "What do you think?" I said, "I think Abbott will probably win 55-45. He said, "No, he'll win bigger than that." I said, "Really?" So I don't
Interesting.
know.
I haven't checked the spread.
53 right now to 45.
53. Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll see what happens. Here, I think he's got 40%, I believe, didn't he? Something like that.
Well, something's got to give between the urban and the statewide at some point. You know, there's such a big disconnect. So.
One of these days.
Yeah.
But you got to find some way to reach the guys out in the rural areas.
Well, Judge,
before it ever change.
Mm-hmm.
thanks for joining us.
Enjoyed it.
Thanks for your service.
Yeah, thank you guys.
We're gonna talk again next week. So.
Yep, I'll be around.
Yep. All right.
Around.
Thanks, Judge.
All right, thank you
Thank
guys.
you.
All right. All right, we're back, and I'm going to try to talk a little louder because apparently too soft-spoken. Too quiet. Too close. Just okay. You know, what can I say? I've got a face for radio and a voice for print. We've got a new guest here, Representative Joaquin Castro, who cruised to victory. No surprise there.
So they packed my district for Democrats.
Right. Actually, I was talking about this with my wife. We were talking about gerrymandering, and I said, "Yeah, Joaquin's district's gerrymandered." And I said, "Well, would he want a more competitive district?" I said, "Well, probably to some degree, yeah."
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'd like to see more Democratic seats or competitive seats, but the legislature basically packed most of the Democratic districts except for the 15th district, which is the one Michelle Vallejo is running in, and Monica de la Cruz, which is the most competitive seat in Texas.
And I haven't looked at the results on that race right now, so I'm not sure where those stand.
Monica has 51.7, Michelle 46.5.
Wow. Interesting.
45.7 of the vote. So.
Wow.
Yeah. So,
not what I was hoping for, but
right. Joaquin, I mean, I haven't been tracking the results, but at this moment, because I'm talking, obviously, but you're likely going to be going back to the House in the minority. So talk to us about that dynamic and a House where, you see perhaps Kevin McCarthy as Speaker or Marjorie Taylor Greene in some type of committee leadership role, or, what's the environment going to be like in that type of dynamic?
Well, for me personally, a very familiar one. The particular personalities aside, I spent 10 years in the deep minority when I was in the state legislature, and then the first 6 years in Congress in the minority party. So in that sense, it's a role that I'm familiar with playing in terms of standing up for what I believe and pressing on issues and policy and so forth. What it means for the country partly depends on what happens in the Senate races also, because what you'll see in the House with Republicans that have taken over, especially Kevin McCarthy, who, and I'm going to opine for a second, but is kind of a weak leader and is very much beholden to the rightist wing of the party because he's worried about losing his grip on leadership. So he's going to let the Majority Taylor Greenes and others, Matt Gaetz's of the Congress, dictate a lot of what the Republican Party, the Republican conference does. So the long and short of it is I think you're going to see more Benghazi committees. You'll see Hunter Biden investigation. You'll see them go after very right-wing extreme policies, a national abortion ban, whatever proposals they have to cut Medicare and Social Security, I think will get a decent look. We'll have to get a decent look from their leadership, again, because McCarthy's scared of losing their support. So I think that's what I'm expecting. I think it's going to be, for those of us who disagree with those things, it's going to be a real battle to fend it all off.
How concerned, for anyone who's watching, or when you talk to your constituents, how concerned should people be about the implications for 2024 in terms of the health of our democracy? I just would like to get your assessment of the Democratic outlook, not Democratic Party, but the health of the functioning of our governance and the acceptance of election results.
I mean, there is a creeping fascism and authoritarianism that is overtaking the Republican Party because Donald Trump is still the star and the head of the Republican Party. And as long as that's true, then most of them are going to follow his lead, and that's where he has taken the party and the country. And so we're in a fragile place. Now, really, it's hard for me to fully answer your question until we see what happens in the elections tonight, and we won't know the final totals, I'm sure, some of them for a day or two. But we need to see how people accept the election results or whether they engage in election denial. And you're right, 24 is a concern because of what Donald Trump keeps saying, but also because part of the price of admission to the Republican Party now to get a nomination to go to Congress for them is to say that you believe the election of 2020 was stolen, that Donald Trump actually won the election. So that level of election denial and the prevalence of it should be concerning for every American.
We met with your opponent. We meet with all the candidates, or as anyone. We invite all the candidates, and anyone. We'll meet with anyone. And he would not. He told us that Joe Biden was president, but he wouldn't. Your opponent would not confirm that Joe Biden won the presidency. That seems
to be kind of the fine line that they're trying to draw. They were trying to draw for the last 2 years, is to admit, hey, this guy is in office, but don't admit that he legitimately won the office. And that's where the party has been heading, and that's what makes it so scary. And really, I think it should scare everybody.
Do we actually? I mean, before you came on tonight, I mean, do you actually know where the House stands? Because I'm just looking where Abigail Spanberger was reelected, and that was in Virginia. That was one of those seats that if Democrats had lost, it was definitely going to go away. But,
right.
And I think Virginia has 2 of those 3 seats they need to hold on to. They've won. So do we we're talking doom and gloom right now, but we don't really have the numbers.
Yeah, I have not seen. And again, because they're coming in from all over the country and so forth, I had mostly focused on the local races and some of the state races. Mm-hmm. We don't know yet for sure. A lot of predictions were that the Democrats would lose the House. But even, losing it by 5 seats or even 10 seats is a lot different than having a 30-seat difference. And
right.
So that makes a big difference as well.
Yeah, I think that I appreciate your point and the context around my doom and gloom question.
I felt the same way until I saw that Spanberger had won.
Right.
But I think when we look at it, traditionally in a midterm, when the party that has the White House just gets wiped out. And you look at inflation, and so the fact that it's close, I think, actually speaks quite a bit about, to your point of, should the Democrats, say, lose the House by 5 or 10 seats, should they hold on to the Senate? That's a much different midterm, actually, than a traditional one.
No, absolutely. And, there's three kinds of political weather conditions that candidates run in. The best conditions are when the other party has their president in office and it's the midterm. The neutral conditions is the presidential year when both bases come out. And the toughest conditions are the ones Democrats are running in right now, where your president is in office and it's your midterm. And the reason that we're not getting blown out as bad as we did in 2010 or 2014, in part, is because Republicans have become so extreme. And there is a sliver, at least, of their voters who are concerned about a ban on abortion with no exception for rape or incest. They're concerned about an insurrection where the leader of the Republican Party has embraced it. They're concerned about when they hear Republicans say that they're going to significantly cut Social Security and Medicare. That is what I think is making the elections a lot more competitive. Otherwise, usually you get popped. You get popped just like we got popped in 2010 and 2014, and they got popped badly in 2018 when Donald Trump was in the White House.
Right. Do you think Biden will and should run for re-election?
Yeah, I think he should. I think, if he's got to make a decision about whether he wants to or not, whether he feels up to it, obviously, or not. But I think he can win in 2024. I think he's our best chance to win in 2024. And if he wants to do it, I think he should.
Elaborate on that because I think folks look at sometimes some of the mistakes he makes, when he's speaking, but he was doing that when he was in his 40s or 50s.
Yeah.
But he won in 2020 because he was the only person walking on the planet who could have beaten Trump.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I think that for the country, he was a kind of reassuring, and he has been a kind of reassuring figure for the country, for Democrats and for Republicans. And I don't think that that's fundamentally changed. Even if Democrats end up losing the House, even if we end up losing the Senate by a seat, Barack Obama, we lost the midterms very badly in 2010, and then he rebounded strongly and beat Mitt Romney in 2012. So I think Joe Biden can do the same thing, in 2024.
And yet, you look at his age, and that's not to be ageism, but it's just the reality of, he'll be 82 if he were reelected, and there is we do have these issues with the speech and some of the statements that are being made. There are a lot of young Democrats right now that could, people of our generation who are ready to take a leadership mantle. So, I don't know. I just wonder if he truly is the best option for your party. I understand why you might say that, but I think there are a lot of valid questions.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of up-and-coming folks who will be great leaders and have good shot at the presidency in the coming years. But you have a president right now who has helped the country bounce back from the worst pandemic in a century, who's helped the economy bounce back, small businesses bounce back. Who has also passed or signed into law significant pieces of legislation in a way that the Congress has not passed in years. So this is mostly a record of success. And again, we see historically the country, Reagan had a horrible year in 1982. Republicans had a horrible midterm in 1982. And then in 1984, he won every state except for one. So presidents are able to bounce back. Same thing with Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton had a horrible year in 94, came back and dominated in 96. And I know, of course, I've heard the critique about his age and so forth. And that's why I say ultimately I trust that he, with his wife and the small circle of people that he trusts, will make a sober decision about whether he wants to do it again and whether he feels up to it. But I would say if they come to the conclusion, he with his trusted confidants and his family, that he is up for it, he should.
I want to jump in with that. You heard when the judge was talking, he said that Democrats can't break through with rural voters in Texas. When we met with you, maybe, I don't know, did you hear him say that? He said that to us earlier.
I missed it, but I trust he said it.
But when we met with you for our recommendation meeting, you made the comment that Republicans take rural voters for granted.
Well, they take white voters for granted.
Okay, so expand on that, and then expand on. I'd like to hear more. I think our viewers would be interested in hearing more about that point. And then also, maybe could you address this concern that Mike Collier said it when we met with him, that it's very difficult for Democrats to connect with the rural voters. So there's the for granted part, and then there's the connection part.
Yeah, I mean, well, let me speak to, to the extent that there is some intersection between rural Texans and white Texans, right? Obviously, not a completely perfect overlap.
Yes,
but,
I appreciate that point.
The larger cities are more diverse and so forth, right? Yeah, what Republicans do is they use a few big scare tactics. And if you watch television and watched all the political advertisements, the border is their biggest one. So they try to scare white Texans, rural Texans, really everybody, with this idea that there's a bunch of brown people coming over here to hurt you, and Democrats are going to let them all in. And that's what it is. It's, hey, they're going to open the border and they're going to let them all in. And so as Republicans, don't worry if we don't do anything about guns killing kids in schools. Don't worry if we don't do anything about people freezing to death with the grid. Don't worry if we're going to cut Social Security, Medicaid. Don't worry if we don't expand Medicaid because people don't have health insurance and because rural hospitals are closing. Don't worry about all of that. What you should be worried about is that there's a bunch of brown people that want to come in here and harm you, and Democrats are going to let them in. That is their number one boogeyman. Now, there are some issues, I think, that are more nuanced. For example, the issue of guns in urban settings is often different than the issue of guns in rural settings. And so I've told a story before about how several years ago, I was taking my mom to the Marfa Film Festival, and we were driving along I-10, and I look off into the distance, and I see this house all by itself with no other houses anywhere nearby. And I thought, man, if somebody breaks into that house at 2 a.m, there is no police or fire or anybody around here or neighbors for a while. So if I lived in that house, I would have a gun to protect myself, right? And, you hear, for example, rural folks speaking about going out and hunting, being able to shoot guns because there is so much distance between properties and so forth. So I'm just using one example of one issue. There's obviously a lot of issues, but where the perception on some things in life in general can be different. So Republicans, I think, seize on that. And when you talk about sensible gun reform because people get shot in Sutherland Springs, or they get shot up at a Walmart in El Paso, or they get shot at school in Uvalde, there is an appeal to rural voters, many of whom understand guns in a different way, that, hey, they're going to take your guns away. And I think people are sitting there thinking, well, why are you going to take my guns away? I'm here by myself in my property, and I go hunting, and I'm not hurting anybody, and I need my gun to protect myself, right? And so they're seeing the issue, they're living the issue in a different way sometimes than I think people in urban America. That said, look, if somebody, I think there's obviously a lot of people in urban America, in San Antonio or other cities that are concerned about the same thing, that if somebody broke into their house at 3 a.m, that they want to protect themselves and their family members. But there are issues and cleavages that Republicans, I think, are apt, and they do every election cycle, that they seize on. And also I think Bethel, we owe him a debt of gratitude because he went out there and spoke to and met with rural voters in a way that a lot of candidates, not just Democrats, but a lot of candidates have not in years. And I do think that will pay dividends in the coming years, actually. And by the way, I also don't think that as Democrats, we've made the case consistently to rural voters about why they should vote for us. You take the issue of rural hospitals. I mean, these folks are having to drive, a lot of them, like miles and miles and miles just to go to the hospital now. In part because the governor didn't expand Medicaid, now you've got some of these rural hospitals that did not benefit from that have closed. That's Republican politics and policy for you.
Broadband.
Yeah, broadband's another one. Sure.
Do you want to expand on your thoughts on Beto's run for governor And
yeah, I mean, we don't know I don't know the final numbers yet. I don't want to
yeah,
call a race before it's called. I haven't seen the numbers, but if you're telling me the trend looks like Abbott will pull it off, or I guess they did call it. You're saying they did call it.
Fox right now is the one I see officially, but others are suggesting. But yeah, right now it's still Abbott with 8 points.
I think you have him. First of all, I think Beto O'Rourke has a future in Texas politics if he wants that eventually. You have in Beto an energetic, charismatic candidate. That's what you're going to need to beat Republicans ultimately in Texas. But remember, this is a very well-qualified candidate, a great candidate who's running in a headwind, okay? So this is like a world-class sprinter that is trying to break the world record, but is trying to do it with a strong headwind, right? It's tough when you're doing it with a headwind. You need to do it in neutral conditions, or you need to do it when there's a tailwind, right? Again, in those 3 weather conditions that I described to you, these are the toughest ones to deal with for a Democrat right now. You got your president in office in a midterm, and with our president, I wish it wasn't so, but obviously President Biden's approval rating is underwater in Texas. Those are the toughest conditions to run in.
Is there a conversation to be had between you and Beto and Julian come 2024?
Well, the Senate race is up in 24. For me, I'm just focused on the House. I don't know what my brother. You'll have to talk to my brother or bring him in here and put him on the spot.
Call him on the phone.
This is Julian?
Yeah.
Oh.
Except for the bearding. I think we're still going to have great candidates in 24. People are going to step up. Democrats have been energized. Look at it this way. I don't know what the number is, but let's just say Beto loses by 8. Well, in 2014, we lost our statewide races by 21 points. So remember, these are supposed to be their best political weather conditions for Republicans this year. Mm-hmm. And you're winning. Their most popular candidate is only beating our candidate by 8 points. So the state, I still believe, is on track to flip. If it doesn't flip before, it will flip when you have the next Republican president in their first midterm. That's when I would put all my chips in that's when it's going to go. Now, that's if we have normal elections before then. At that time. I don't know that we will. If you get Trump back, if you get DeSantis, if you get all these election deniers, we may see it in Arizona this time where they just won't, they won't accept the election results. We may see it in other states. Then we may not have normal elections anymore. That's what's at stake.
How do you? I don't know. We don't know what the numbers are yet. For young people, it looked like in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania that they were coming out. But for young folks in Texas, anywhere, we saw this enthusiasm. It gave some of us the thought that maybe Beto could win. How do you keep that enthusiasm going for another round? Saying, because you were enthusiastic in 2018 with Beto, but you didn't quite win. You were enthusiastic in 2022 with Beto, and you didn't win again. How do you stoke that to keep it burning?
I think we always try to impart the idea to people that they ought to go out and vote because they believe in something, because they stand for something in an affirmative way. But the truth in politics is a lot of the energy from politics is oppositional. That's why in 2018 you saw such a huge turnout against Donald Trump, because of the horrors, because of family separation, for example, because of the different things that he was doing. What you're going to see if Republicans take back the House, which it looks like maybe they're going to, you're going to see them pursuing these policies that I think are going to horrify young people and other segments of the country. And I think you're going to see a lot of that same energy. It's not the same as having a president doing it, but a lot of the same energy come back in 24. And then, I say this as a Democrat, God forbid they win in 24, because who knows at that point where we'll be as a country.
And we don't know what's going to happen tonight, but that energy, I think some of us thought, with Dobbs, you valued it maybe to a lesser extent, but especially with Dobbs, I think thought that was maybe the unknown, and there was these people would come out and vote, and how do you? Is there maybe it's just the continued horror of it all? Maybe it's a Republican-led Congress for 2 years, is what you're saying. It's going to need to.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason why a party will get control of, let's say, the presidency, the Senate, and the House, and then within a few years, will often lose it, because so much of the energy in politics is oppositional. So much of it is a reaction against what the other side is doing, for better or worse. But yeah, I mean, they're full. What I'm saying is, if they take back control of the House, I think you're going to have on display again the craziness, the horror, the Trumpian vision that's worsened since even 2020 now, on display in the House of Representatives, and it's not going to be pretty. And I think people are going to react against that. Again, I've talked about some of the positive things that we stand for and what the Congress passed over the last 2 years while we've had control. But to me, there are horrors awaiting as these Republicans take over the House.
What are the biggest horrors you see?
I think they're gonna. I think you're gonna start to see book bans. I think you're gonna see an attempt at a national abortion ban. Mm-hmm. I think they're gonna try to make gun laws even more lax, in whatever ways they can. They're gonna attack democracy. So everything that the Marjorie Taylor Greenes and the Matt Gaetzes of the world have been talking about for the last few years, most of those things, I think, are going to get a shot at passing, at least in the Republican House.
Can you speak a little bit about the potential shift that's happening in South Texas? There's been a lot of national discussion, obviously, about Republican gains with Hispanic voters in South Texas, and obviously we don't know the results of the races there. But I mean, do you have, just in a broad sense, beyond these specific races, do you see any trend or shift there? Do you have any concerns about Latino voters not necessarily connecting with Democratic Party, or the criticism that the Democratic Party takes Latino voters for granted?
Well, I think that what happened for years is that those races in the Valley, my wife is from the Rio Grande Valley, right, from Hidalgo County, they were non-competitive because it was so Democratic. It was like Republicans in Midland, right? Once you won the primary, that was it, right? November didn't matter, right? And that's how it was in the Valley. And so what happened was, Democrats in November didn't go out there and do the door knocking and the phone calls and mail the literature or anything. Even the Democrats weren't doing that because they were going to beat the Republicans easily. So what can happen over time is that there can be an atrophy between the party and the people, and it leaves an opening for the other side. So I believe that can mostly be remedied by actually getting there and working the districts. That will certainly be put to the test today with some of these races. Now, I will point out that in that McAllen district, District 15, Republicans redrew that race to make it an R+3 district. So if the Republican wins that seat, that's how it was drawn for a Republican to win. So you got to be careful when you ascribe that. Well, Hispanics, it became a Republican +3 seat, right? And also, remember, George Bush won like 44% of the Hispanic vote in 1994. In fact, I think he got like almost half of El Paso that year or something, right? And then that just trended back the other way. So I'm not convinced that this is even a long-term shift in the allegiances of the Hispanic community in Texas. Things have changed over the years. I also think there's a lot more misinformation and disinformation on where the Latino community, the Hispanic community, gets its information. On Facebook, for example, and YouTube, intentional disinformation about politics. And that has to be scrubbed out. A lot of it is in Spanish now. There's a lot of lies in Spanish that we would never tolerate in English platforms. So we've got to scrub those things out. I also think that Donald Trump turned politics into a kind of WWE sport like a spectator sport that made it kind of entertaining for people, just on a meta level where people look at the guy and they, oh yeah, that guy's kind of sticking the finger at the system, and yeah, I like that. Because the system has left them behind, right? It hasn't left Donald Trump behind. He's actually made his money off of it, right? They've been left behind by the system, so they want somebody that's screwing the system. It's just that, he's screwing them, right? But they see him as like sticking the finger at the system, and so yeah, you got to be able to Nelson was talking about relating to people. You got to go in there and be able to relate to folks and go through these things. And there's no way around it. Like, you got to get into the communities and do that. And you need the personalities to do it. It's interesting. Like, I've always thought, I've thought once in a while about what it would be like in politics to match up personality versus personality when you're running candidates, right? Mm-hmm. Because like Donald Trump, you think about, anyway, it's for another day, but these elections, I think, are just, they'll be very telling. But I'm still hoping for a good night for Democrats.
You mentioned the misinformation and disinformation campaign directed at Hispanic voters, and that's more broadly, we have an issue of misinformation, disinformation on social media. Kerry's on Twitter right now. He's scrolling through results. You're on Twitter. I mean, do you? I guess I have kind of two parts of a question here. I mean, given everything that's happening with Twitter, do you think about leaving the platform? Yeah. And then two, from a regulatory perspective, should Congress intervene on these social media platforms, given some of the misinformation that gets promoted?
Yeah,
that's a very dicey topic.
No, it is, because you're balancing First Amendment rights of free speech with, not wanting like 40% of people to believe that Democrats are eating babies or whatever, right? Like, and so yeah, but I do think that there is a role for Congress to play, perhaps even in legislation. It should not be too heavy-handed. You don't want the state or the government dictating content, right?
Right.
But at the same time, you're trying to prevent people from just like completely making up conspiracies and lies and using money to sell those to people and like, completely rot people's brains with it. So I do think there's a role there, not a heavy-handed role, but an appropriate role. And then on Twitter, it's going to be interesting to see how it shakes out. It's been erratic over the last week or so. In terms of making my decision on whether I stay or whether I go, like my role is to get information out to people, right? So that's why I'm on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and so forth. That's how I'm going to base my decision. But it has kind of gotten kind of chaotic and erratic on the site the last few weeks.
As a high-profile congressman, as a high-profile Brown congressman, do you feel? How do you when you first entered Congress 10 years ago, when it comes to your personal security, how has that changed in the 10 years then, specifically in the last 3 or 4 years?
Yeah, I mean, the social media aspect of it has changed. There was no social media when I started. Now it's like everybody's opinion is surrounding you all the time. The physicality of it, I think, has also changed some. Even this election, like I noticed you didn't have as many people putting up yard signs, bumper stickers, wearing campaign shirts. And I think a part of that is that they don't want the negative, these are regular people, they don't want the negative attention of others whom they think may get upset and confront them based on their political choices. January 6th, obviously, I think opened a Pandora's box. But yeah, I mean, I am much more aware now of my surroundings. I would say less carefree than I was before. I'm also in a body now that I was not before when I was, not as much before when I was in the state legislature, in a body now where you are perceived as hyperpartisan, right? Like you're seen that way more. And so therefore the ire and the anger and all of that is directed at you in a much more intense way. I think that it's, I think that it's coming mostly from the right wing, not exclusively from the right wing. Like Ted, somebody just threw a can at Ted Cruz yesterday. That guy should not have done that, and he should be held accountable for that. Obviously, I don't like political violence directed at anybody. And every time I see it directed at anybody, Republican or Democrat, it makes me upset, and it also concerns me. And especially like he had his family there, his daughter's there
the
with
anger.
him and stuff.
There's so much anger right
Yeah,
now.
it's just very raw. Politics is very, very raw right now. Very raw.
I don't know. I don't see it healing. I don't understand I don't expect it to heal. Just this morning, I had already early voted, but I just visited a poll site near my house. And when I was there, it just felt very angry and just very, like, people were to themselves. They were very quiet. I did speak to the very first voter who was there, and she wouldn't speak, and she was very anti-media, anti-journalist, and so she just said, well, I'm just here, I came to be early. I don't want to take 4 hours, and I said, okay, that's good, and that was it. But it felt very negative, and I hadn't felt that before, and it was just this looming sense. I don't know. What's going to change it? What do you think? What'll it take?
Yeah, that's like the $64,000 question.
Yeah.
I think you have to start by rooting out the conspiracies and the lies and the disinformation. I really think that affects so many people's perceptions and beliefs in politics. You also got to do something about Donald Trump. Like, now he's an American, he has free speech, he can say what he wants, but this should not be the leader of the Republican Party, okay? Somebody who is speaking like an authoritarian fascist wannabe, that sets the tone. When you've got this guy, like ex-president, saying these things, it sets the tone for how a lot of Americans are going to behave. And, what do you do about that? Well, his party, they need to replace him with somebody else who's going to be more responsible. Unfortunately, I think like DeSantis, the guy that seems like he's in the number 2 spot, doesn't seem to be much better. His rhetoric isn't much better. His policies certainly aren't much better. They just said that they're not going to allow federal elections monitors to go into the elections in Florida, monitor the elections in Florida.
Civil Rights Act of 1957.
Yeah, and so I think those are two things that I tell people now. Like, I got elected in 2002. The big debates between the parties used to be about tax cuts and vouchers and like this policy stuff. Now it's like all this other. It's come so far in 20 years.
Is there any Republican lawmaker that you work well with that you like? Is there someone you want to give a shout out to of like this?
Yeah.
Or is that just like is that like just like gonna end up in some attack ad? In primary,
no,
right?
yeah.
So
well, and also like because it's been like a little kind of like doom and gloom, but because I think it should be, but the odd thing is there's a lot of pieces of legislation that are outside of what you would consider the controversial subjects that get overwhelming bipartisan support every week we're in Congress, that we're in session, okay? So I have worked with many Republicans on legislation. I'll take Mike McCall, right, representative in District 10, who I've worked with on different pieces of legislation very well. And he, if Republicans take over, he's probably going to be the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee that I sit on. There's somebody that I've worked well with on legislation. I even worked with Mark Meadows, right, who was the chair of the Freedom Caucus and became President Trump's chief of staff. He and I had a pro-democracy bill, global democracy bill, that we passed through the House a few years back. And like a lot of other stuff, it got stalled in the Senate, right? But there's a lot of working across the aisle that goes on, which you would think, well, then why can't that transfer over into the politics and some of the other big legislation, right? But, here we are.
Thank you for coming in.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all for doing
I know we're
this.
at top of the hour. And for everyone who watched, thanks for watching us. First time doing this live like this, so thank you.
Thank you.
Take care, y'all.
Amen.
All right, thanks, Joaquin.
Good to see you.
Dude, you guys, that was awesome.